I'm Elaine Mitchell, 28, and I'll never forget the look of horror on my parents' faces at my college graduation. After forcing me to pay my own way through school while funding my sister Kimberly's entire education, they stood frozen as the dean announced my summa cum laude status and the prestigious fellowship I'd earned. But that wasn't what made them pale. It was the moment the university president personally thanked them for their generous seven-figure donation to our engineering department, the donation they never made. The truth about our family's twisted financial favoritism was about to explode publicly. Before I dive into how I engineered the ultimate family karma moment, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments. I'm always amazed at how family drama resonates across different cultures. If this story of sweet justice against parental favoritism speaks to you, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about standing up for yourself. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in the Mitchell family meant understanding my place early on. My parents, Robert and Margaret Mitchell, were what most would consider middle-class. Dad worked as an account manager at an insurance company while Mom taught 4th grade at the local elementary school. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. At least, that's what I thought until college conversations began. My sister Kimberly, 4 years older than me, was the golden child from day one. Even in my earliest memories, the pattern was clear. For Kimberly's 10th birthday, my parents rented out the local skating rink and invited her entire grade. For my 10th birthday, I got a small family dinner and a store-bought cake. When Kimberly wanted dance lessons, they found the money. When I wanted to join the science club that required a modest fee for materials, I was told to be reasonable about expenses. Kimberly is more sensitive, my mother would explain when I'd gather the courage to point out the discrepancies. She needs extra support to thrive. My father rarely contradicted my mother. If he noticed the favoritism, he kept silent about it, deferring to Mom with a standard. Listen to your mother, Elaine. Over time, I came to understand that in our household, harmony meant keeping Mom and Kimberly happy. My feelings were collateral damage. By 14, I'd taken matters into my own hands, finding an after-school job at the local library reshelving books. My parents didn't object, in fact. They seemed relieved that I had found a way to fund my own activities. "That's our responsible girl," they'd say, as if my self-sufficiency was a personality trait rather than a necessity born from their neglect. Meanwhile, Kimberly developed a pattern that would continue into adulthood, starting projects with enthusiasm, then abandoning them when they required actual effort. Piano lessons lasted 3 months. Volleyball ended after 1 season. The expensive oil painting set gathered dust after 2 attempts. Each time, my parents consoled her, assuring her it wasn't her fault, and something else would surely capture her passion. Despite minimal parental interest, I excelled academically. Studying became my refuge. Teachers gave clear expectations and rewarded hard work consistently, unlike the shifting goalpost at home. By sophomore year, I was taking advanced placement classes and earning recognition that even my parents couldn't completely ignore, though they certainly tried. The science award incident during junior year crystallized everything. After months of work, my research project on biodegradable plastics won the state science fair and qualified for nationals. The award ceremony was scheduled for a Tuesday evening. Kimberly's dance recital, her 3rd attempt at dance in 4 years, was the same night. "We're so proud of you, Elaine," my mother said. "But Kimberly really needs our support right now. Dancing makes her so nervous." Dad just looked uncomfortable and mumbled something about wishing they could clone themselves. I attended my ceremony alone, accepting my award to applause from strangers while fighting back tears. High school graduation should have been a turning point. With a 4 gigapascals and early acceptance to Cornell's engineering program, I'd secured a partial scholarship, but would need additional financial support. I'd saved from my library job and later my weekend work at the local coffee shop, but college costs far exceeded my modest savings. The family meeting the night after graduation remains burned in my memory. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd celebrated Kimberly's acceptance to NYU the previous year. "Honey," my father began, looking genuinely pained, "we've looked at the numbers every way possible, but we just can't afford to help with your tuition." "We've already committed to covering Kimberly's expenses," my mother added, as if this was an act of God rather than a choice. "You're so responsible and resourceful, Elaine. We know you'll figure something out." What they didn't say, what they never acknowledged, was that they had chosen to fund one daughter's education fully, while abandoning the other to sink or swim alone. As I looked at their faces, Dad's guilty, Mom's expectant, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not only survive without them, I would thrive despite them. And someday, they would understand exactly what their favoritism had cost us all. Cornell University's sprawling campus became my new home in the fall of 2013. Unlike other freshmen whose parents helped them move in, bought their textbooks, and left tearful goodbyes, I arrived alone with 2 suitcases and determination burning in my chest. While my classmates navigated course selections and social events, I was juggling scholarship paperwork, student loan applications, and hunting for campus jobs. Within 2 weeks, I'd secured positions at both the engineering department's office and the campus coffee shop, working a combined 30 hours weekly while maintaining a full course load. My schedule was brutal. Classes from morning until mid-afternoon, work until evening, then studying until midnight. Weekends meant double shifts, and catching up on assignments. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't often afford. Meanwhile, my phone calls home yielded stories about Kimberly's college experience at NYU. My parents had rented her a private apartment near campus, worried that dorm life would be too stressful for her. They funded her meal plan, her textbooks, and a monthly allowance that exceeded my entire self-earned income. When Kimberly complained about her history professor's totally unfair grading, my father personally called the department to discuss it. Holiday breaks highlighted our diverging paths even more starkly. My first Thanksgiving at Cornell, I couldn't afford the flight home, so I stayed in my dorm and picked up extra shifts. My mother called, her voice tinged with practiced sympathy. "We miss you, honey, but we understand. Kimberly's really struggling with her midterm grades, so we're taking her to Cancun for the break to help her decompress." I bit back the questions burning my throat. Why was her stress more valid than mine? Why did her mediocre performance deserve a vacation, while my straight-A's merited nothing? Instead, I said, "Have a good trip," and ended the call before my voice could betray me. By sophomore year, I discovered my passion for biomedical engineering. Professor Diana Hayes noticed my consistent top performance despite my obvious exhaustion and invited me to join her research team. This small act of recognition from someone who saw my potential rather than my utility changed everything. In her lab, ideas mattered more than background, and effort translated directly to respect. "You have a gift, Elaine," she told me, after I'd suggested an innovative approach to a problem that had stalled their project. "But you're running yourself into the ground. Talk to me." So I did. For the first time, I shared the full story of my family's dynamics with someone who didn't immediately dismiss my feelings. Diana didn't offer empty platitudes or suggest I should be grateful for my independence. Instead, she listened, then helped me apply for a paid research position that would replace one of my other jobs while building my resume. That spring, I finally gathered the courage to directly confront my mother about the favoritism during a rare weekend visit home. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many unequal decisions had been announced. "Mom, I need to understand something," I began carefully. "Why did you and Dad decide to pay for all of Kimberly's expenses but none of mine?" My mother's face tightened. "That's not fair, Elaine. We've always treated you girls equally." "That's objectively untrue," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Kimberly's apartment alone costs more than my entire semester's expenses." "You've always been more capable," she said, as if complimenting me. "Kimberly needs more support. She's artistic, sensitive. College is harder for her." "I work 30 hours a week while maintaining a 4 gigapascals, I countered. "How is that easier?" The conversation ended as they always did, with my mother becoming defensive, then dismissive, and finally changing the subject to Kimberly's latest crisis. This time, it was her third major change in 2 years, from art history to psychology to communications. A week later, I received news that my undergraduate research project had won a prestigious national award. The recognition came with a $5,000 stipend and publication in an academic journal, a rare honor for an undergraduate. I called home, allowing myself a moment of hope that this achievement might finally register. "That's nice, honey," my mother said distractedly after my announcement. "Listen, we're having a bit of a situation here. Kimberly's decided to take a break from school. She's feeling overwhelmed and needs to reassess. We're trying to convince the university to refund this semester's tuition." That evening, I sat on my dorm room floor and finally allowed myself to cry, not from sadness, but from clarity. No achievement would ever be enough to earn the support they freely gave my sister. The problem wasn't my worth, it was their perception. And nothing I could do would change that. What I didn't know then was that Kimberly's break would trigger a family financial crisis that would ultimately set my revenge in motion. My parents had not only paid her full tuition before her withdrawal, but had also put down a non-refundable deposit on an expensive study abroad program she'd been planning for the following semester. Money they claimed not to have for my education was being hemorrhaged on my sister's academic false starts. As junior year began, I returned to Cornell with a new perspective. The family I'd been born into might never see my value, but I was building connections with people who did. Professor Hayes had become a mentor and surrogate mother figure. My research team respected my contributions. And for the first time, I was allowing myself to envision a future defined by my achievements rather than my family's approval. Senior year arrived with a mixture of anticipation and dread. My research was gaining attention beyond campus, with 2 biotech companies expressing interest in the patent application Professor Hayes had encouraged me to file. Academically, I was thriving, on track to graduate summa cum laude with multiple job offers already on the horizon. Yet each interaction with my family left me emotionally drained, reopening wounds I was desperately trying to heal. The final straw came during fall break of senior year. I'd scraped together enough money to fly home for a long weekend, hoping to repair some of the distance that had grown between us. Instead, I discovered something that shattered any remaining illusions about my place in the family. While searching for extra blankets in my parents' home office, I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers on the desk. As I gathered them, a bank document caught my eye. A mortgage refinancing agreement dated just 2 months earlier. Curiosity made me scan the details, and what I found froze me in place. My parents had mortgaged their house, taking on $175,000 in additional debt to finance Kimberly's 5th year at NYU and an upcoming semester at their Paris campus. The same parents who couldn't spare a dime for my education had leveraged their most significant asset to fund my sister's extended academic wanderings. I remember sitting on the floor, papers trembling in my hands, as the full weight of their betrayal hit me. This wasn't about money. It had never been about money. They had made a conscious choice, time and again, to invest in Kimberly while expecting me to fend for myself. Back at Cornell, I suffered what my roommate later described as an emotional breakdown. For 3 days, I barely left my bed, skipping classes and ignoring calls. The pain was physical, a constant pressure in my chest that made even breathing feel like an insurmountable task. Years of dismissed feelings, explained away favoritism, and outright lies crashed over me in waves that threatened to pull me under completely. Professor Diana Hayes noticed my absence from lab meetings and tracked me down. She took one look at my tear-stained face and disheveled appearance and did something no one in my family ever had. She prioritized my well-being over everything else. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," she said, sitting beside me on my narrow dorm bed. "But first, you need to talk to someone professional." Diana personally drove me to my first therapy appointment with Dr. Lisa Chen, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chen helped me identify the patterns of emotional neglect that had shaped my childhood and recognize that what I'd experienced wasn't normal or acceptable. "What you're describing is a form of emotional abuse," Dr. Chen said during our 4th session. "Differential treatment of siblings to this degree damages a child's sense of self-worth and safety within the family." "But they never hit me," I argued weakly. "They paid for the basics: food, shelter, clothes. Physical needs are only one part of parenting," she explained gently. "Children also need emotional nurturing, recognition, and fair treatment. Your parents failed to provide those things consistently to you while freely giving them to your sister. That's harmful, Elaine. Those sessions became a lifeline. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel anger, not just hurt or disappointment, but pure, cleansing rage at the injustice I'd endured. And with anger came clarity. I deserved better. I always had. As my emotional health improved, my academic work accelerated. The biomedical innovation I'd been developing, a more efficient drug delivery system for cancer treatments, was showing promising results in preliminary testing. Boston Bioscience, a leading pharmaceutical research company, approached me about joining their team after graduation, offering a six-figure starting salary and support for my continued graduate education. One evening after receiving the formal offer letter, I sat in Professor Hayes's office, sharing my news and my lingering sadness that my family would likely dismiss this achievement as they had all others. "You know," Diana said thoughtfully, "your work has real value, not just scientifically, but financially. Have you considered what that might mean?" "I'll be financially independent," I replied. "Never have to ask them for help again." "Think bigger," she urged. "Your patent could be worth millions eventually. You could do something meaningful with that, something that would matter to you, and perhaps send a message to your family." That conversation planted a seed. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about Diana's words while walking across campus. Cornell had been my salvation, the place where I'd discovered my value and potential despite my family's indifference. What if there was a way to both honor that and create a permanent reminder of my parents' failure? I scheduled a meeting with the university's development office, ostensibly to discuss future alumni giving as a soon-to-be graduate. The development officer, Mr. Peterson, greeted me warmly, clearly not expecting much from a student but appreciating the gesture. "Actually," I said after preliminary pleasantries, "I'm interested in establishing a scholarship fund for students whose families won't or can't support their education." Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "That's commendable, but scholarship endowments typically require significant capital, usually starting at $50,000 for a modest award." "What about a seven-figure donation?" I asked calmly, sliding over a preliminary valuation of my patent rights from Boston Bioscience. His expression transformed from polite interest to focused attention. "That would create one of our most substantial scholarship funds. We'd be talking about supporting multiple students annually in perpetuity. And would such a donation be recognized at graduation? Publicly acknowledged?" "Absolutely. Donations of that magnitude are announced at the ceremony, with the donors recognized from the stage." As I left his office, a plan was forming, a plan for recognition, for justice, and yes, for revenge. Not petty or destructive revenge, but the kind that would create something positive from all my pain, while ensuring my parents finally faced the truth they'd denied for so long. Over the next months, I met secretly with university officials, patent attorneys, and Boston Bioscience executives. I established a foundation in my family's name, the Mitchell Family Foundation, with the first major deposit coming from the advance Boston Bioscience paid for my patent rights. The terms were explicit. The foundation would fund scholarships for students who were supporting themselves through college due to family financial abandonment. And the announcement would come at graduation, with my parents in the audience, believing they were simply there to see me receive my diploma. It was elegant. It was generous. And it would force them to confront the truth about their parenting in the most public way possible. For the first time since childhood, I felt a sense of power over my narrative. The anger that had threatened to consume me was being channeled into something constructive, a way to help others while holding a mirror to my family's darkest failure. As graduation approached, I felt strangely calm. The pieces were in place. After years of being invisible in my own family, I was about to become impossible to ignore. Winter melted into spring of my senior year, and with each passing day, my plan grew more refined. What had started as an emotional reaction was evolving into a meticulous operation requiring precision and discretion. I'd always been organized a necessity when juggling multiple jobs and a full course load, but planning my graduation revenge brought out a level of strategic thinking I hadn't known I possessed. The foundation of everything was my patent. Working with Boston Bioscience's legal team and my own patent attorney, I finalized the licensing agreement that would provide the financial backbone for my plan. The initial payment alone was substantial enough to establish the scholarship fund and secure my own financial future. Future royalties would ensure the foundation's growth for decades to come. These terms are extremely favorable for someone at your career stage, my attorney remarked during our final review. They must really want your technology. They did. My drug delivery system promised to reduce side effects in chemotherapy while increasing efficacy, potentially saving thousands of lives. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' neglect had inadvertently pushed me toward this achievement. While Kimberly was being coddled through her educational meandering, I'd been developing innovations that would actually change lives. Working with the university's development and public relations teams required finesse. I needed their cooperation without revealing the personal motivation behind my donation. The Mitchell Family Foundation aims to support students who find themselves without family financial support, I explained to the development committee. Having worked multiple jobs throughout my time at Cornell, I understand the challenges these students face. The committee chair, impressed by both the amount and the specific focus of the donation, assigned Senior Development Officer James Wilson to work exclusively on my foundation. We typically announce major donations at commencement, James confirmed during one of our planning sessions. Given the size of your contribution, President Warrington will personally recognize the Mitchell family from the podium. Perfect, I replied, careful to keep my expression neutral. And my parents will be seated where, exactly? Donors' families are always given premium seating, front and center. We'll arrange everything. That piece secured, I turned to controlling information flow to my biological family. This required careful compartmentalization, telling them just enough to ensure their attendance without revealing anything that might spoil the surprise. Graduation is really important to me, I emphasized during a rare call home. I've worked so hard to get here without any help. I'd really appreciate if you all would attend. My mother sighed that put-upon sigh I'd known my whole life. Of course we'll be there, Elaine. Although I don't know why you always have to bring up managing on your own. You chose to be so independent. I bit back the reflexive correction they had forced independence on me, not the other way around, and instead focused on logistics. Great. The ceremony starts at 10 a.m. You should arrive by 9:30. Someone from the university will contact you about special seating. Special seating? Why would we get special seating? My father asked. Confusion evident. I've been involved with some university initiatives, I replied vaguely. Just standard recognition stuff. While orchestrating the public revelation, I was simultaneously building something far more valuable. A genuine support system. Professor Diana Hayes had become more than a mentor, she was the mother figure I'd always craved, offering guidance without conditions and celebration without comparison. I've recommended you for the department's Distinguished Graduate Award, she told me one afternoon in the lab. And regardless of that outcome, I want you to know how proud I am of everything you've accomplished, Elaine. Not just the research, though, that's remarkable, but the person you've become despite significant obstacles. Her words meant more than any academic recognition could. Diana saw me, truly saw me, in a way my parents never had. My friendship circle had expanded too. My roommate Tamara had initially been just someone sharing my space, but over 4 years, she'd become the sister I'd never effectively had with Kimberly. When I finally shared the full truth about my family and my planned graduation surprise, she was both supportive and cautionary. I understand why you're doing this, she said, cross-legged on her bed across from mine. God knows they deserve it. But are you prepared for the aftermath? This will change your relationship with them forever. Our relationship was broken from the beginning, I replied. At least this way. Some good comes from all the hurt. Other students will benefit, even if my family ties don't survive. Department head Dr. Richardson and University President Dr. Warrington had also become key allies. Though neither knew the personal motivation behind my donation, they saw me as an exceptionally successful graduate giving back to her alma mater exactly the narrative I wanted to project publicly. Your contribution will transform lives, Miss Mitchell, President Warrington told me during our planning meeting. Students who might otherwise abandon their education for financial reasons will continue because of your family's generosity. The phrase, "your family's generosity," sent a shiver down my spine every time I heard it. If only they knew. As May approached, all the elements were aligning perfectly. The Mitchell Family Scholarship for self-supporting students was established and would be announced at graduation. Boston Bioscience had confirmed my starting position with a formal contract and relocation package to their Cambridge headquarters. My apartment lease was signed, and Tamara would be joining me in Massachusetts, having secured her own job at a nearby marketing firm. The final preparations were almost complete when I received an unexpected call from Kimberly. We rarely spoke directly anymore, most family communication filtered through our parents, with me hearing about Kimberly's latest drama third hand. "So, I might come to your graduation," she said without preamble. "Oh?" I responded, trying to mask my alarm. Kimberly's presence could complicate things, particularly if she created one of her scenes. "Yeah, I'm between things right now," she continued, which I translated as unemployed again. "Mom says they're getting special seats or something. Sounds like you're finally doing something noteworthy." The dismissive tone was so familiar it barely registered anymore. "It would be nice to have the whole family there," I said noncommittally. "Whatever. As long as it doesn't interfere with my summer plans." Paris was supposed to happen this spring before the program got postponed again. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while mentally adjusting my expectations. Kimberly would likely attend, which meant planning for her potential reactions as well. Given her history of jealousy whenever attention shifted away from her, I needed to be prepared. The weekend before graduation, I made a final visit to Dr. Chen, my therapist who had guided me through the emotional storm of the past year. "Are you sure this is about justice and not vengeance?" she asked after I'd explained the full extent of my plan. "Does the distinction matter if the outcome is positive?" I countered. "It matters for your healing," she said gently. "Vengeance keeps you tethered to the pain. Justice can help you move beyond it." I considered her words carefully. The scholarship will help students like me. That's justice. The public revelation forces my parents to confront their favoritism. That might be vengeance, but it's also truth. I think I need both to truly close this chapter. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Just be prepared for their reactions. People rarely accept uncomfortable truths gracefully, especially when they're revealed publicly." As I left her office for the last time, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and peace. The years of silent suffering, of swallowing hurt while watching my sister receive everything I'd been denied, were coming to an end. In just 7 days, the truth would be unavoidable, announced from a stage to hundreds of witnesses. I've always had to fight for recognition in this life. I've had to work twice as hard for half the support. But watching this plan unfold has taught me something powerful about myself. I'm not just a survivor. I'm a builder. I've built a career, a support system, and now a legacy that will help others like me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or had to fight for what others get easily, know you're not alone. This journey has shown me that we can transform pain into purpose. I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments. How have you overcome family challenges? While I get ready to share the next part of my story, take a second to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this all played out on graduation day. Trust me, it's a moment you won't want to miss. The week before graduation unfolded with a predictable pattern, my family's continued indifference contrasted sharply with the behind-the-scenes preparations for my moment of truth. I'd returned home for a few days before the ceremony, ostensibly to spend time with family, but really to ensure they wouldn't back out of attending. The moment I walked through my childhood front door, I knew nothing had changed. My room had been converted to a creative space for Kimberly's latest hobby, pottery, with a wheel installed where my desk had once stood and clay stains on the carpet. Meanwhile, Kimberly's room remained a shrine to her adolescence, preserved exactly as she'd left it for college 6 years earlier. "We figured you wouldn't mind since you're never here anyway," my mother explained with a dismissive wave when she saw my expression. Kimberly needed somewhere to explore her artistic side while she's staying with us. I swallowed the obvious retort that Kimberly was 32 and had been temporarily living at home for nearly 8 months since her latest academic program hadn't worked out. Instead, I placed my overnight bag in the hall closet and asked about graduation plans. "Oh, we've got it all arranged," my father said, barely looking up from his newspaper. Though the hotel rooms near campus are highway robbery this time of year, 2 nights is costing us almost $1,000. "We're making quite a sacrifice," my mother added pointedly, "especially with all the financial strain we're under with Kimberly's situation." The irony was almost too much to bear. They were complaining about hotel costs for my graduation after spending hundreds of thousands on Kimberly's extended educational wanderings. Still, I needed them there, so I bit my tongue. "I appreciate you coming," I said instead. "It means a lot to have family there for this milestone." Dinner that evening was entirely focused on Kimberly, who arrived late and immediately dominated the conversation. She'd recently been let go from her administrative assistant position at a local real estate office. "They just couldn't handle my creative approach to scheduling," she explained, and was considering yet another career path. "I'm thinking about fashion design now," she announced, helping herself to seconds before I'd even been served. "I've always had an eye for style, and I found this amazing program in Milan." My parents nodded encouragingly, and I could almost see the mental calculations as they figured out how to finance this latest whim. Not once during the entire meal did anyone ask about my graduation, my summa cum laude status, or my job with Boston Bioscience. When I tried to mention the position, my mother cut me off. "That reminds me. Kimberly needs business attire for interviews. Elaine, you're working now, maybe you could help her with a shopping spree?" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. I hadn't even graduated yet, and they were already treating my future earnings as a family resource while simultaneously dismissing my achievement. "I'll be relocating to Boston and starting my own life," I said carefully. "My salary will be covering my apartment, student loans, and establishing my career." "So selfish," my mother murmured to Kimberly, just loud enough for me to hear. Always been that way. By the second day of my visit, tensions were simmering just below the surface. My parents had grudgingly agreed to drive to Cornell on Friday evening before Saturday's ceremony, though they complained about traffic, parking, and the inconvenience of it all. Kimberly vacillated between dismissing my graduation as just a piece of paper and sulking that I was getting attention. The breaking point came during Friday breakfast. I'd made a final attempt to impress upon them the significance of this event. "Cornell's engineering program is one of the best in the country," I explained. "Graduating at the top of my class has opened doors that will shape my entire career." "Everyone gets a degree these days," Kimberly said with a yawn. "It's not that special. I could have finished too if I'd wanted to settle for something that didn't fulfill me creatively." I looked to my parents, hoping for some defense, some acknowledgement of the work I'd put in. Instead, my mother patted Kimberly's hand. "Not everyone needs to follow the same path, Elaine. Kimberly is exploring her authentic self. That takes courage." Something inside me snapped. 4 years of working to exhaustion, of loans and multiple jobs, of achieving excellence without support or recognition, all dismissed in favor of my sister's courage to repeatedly quit. "Does it take courage to let mom and dad remortgage their house to fund your 5th attempt at finding yourself?" I asked, the words escaping before I could stop them. The kitchen went silent. My father's face drained of color, while my mother's flushed red. "How dare you?" she hissed. "That's private family business." "I'm family too," I replied, standing up from the table. "Or at least, I'm supposed to be. But I've never been treated like it. You've supported every one of Kimberly's failures while ignoring all my successes." "Not everyone can be special like Kimberly," my mother snapped. The phrase so familiar it almost made me laugh. It was her standard explanation for their favoritism, repeated throughout my childhood. "You're right," I agreed, gathering my things. "Not everyone can be special like Kimberly. Some of us actually have to achieve things on our own merit." I left for Cornell that morning instead of waiting to travel with them. As I drove away from my childhood home, I felt strangely calm. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Either my family would finally see the truth about our dynamics, or they would double down on their denial. Either way, I would no longer be silently accepting the role they'd assigned me. That evening in my dorm room, preparing for the next day's ceremony, I received a text from my father. "We're checked into the hotel. Your mother is upset about this morning. No apology. No acknowledgement of the underlying issues. Just another expectation that I would accommodate their feelings while mine remained irrelevant. I replied simply, "I'll see you all at graduation. Please don't be late, the university has arranged special seating for you." As I hung up my graduation gown and placed my cap on my desk, I thought about Dr. Chen's distinction between justice and vengeance. Tomorrow would bring both justice for the student I'd been, struggling alone while watching my sister receive everything I'd been denied, and yes, a measure of vengeance for all the times my feelings had been dismissed, my achievements minimized, my needs considered secondary. The Mitchell Family Scholarship would help students like me for generations to come. That was unequivocally good. The public revelation of my family's favoritism would be painful and potentially destructive. But after 28 years of having my reality denied, I needed the truth to be acknowledged not just privately, but publicly, undeniably. I slept soundly that night, perhaps better than I had in years. The anxiety that had been my constant companion, the desperate need for parental approval that had never been fulfilled, had finally quieted. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would no longer be defined by what my family couldn't give me, but by what I had built despite their neglect. Morning arrived with perfect May sunshine, as if the universe itself approved of what was to come. I dressed carefully in the new outfit I'd purchased for the occasion, a tailored navy dress that projected professional confidence rather than academic tradition. Under my graduation gown, I wanted to already embody the successful biomedical researcher I was becoming, not the perpetually overlooked daughter I'd been. A text from Tamara flashed on my phone. "It's showtime. You've earned this moment, all of it." I smiled, grateful once again for the family I'd chosen rather than the one I'd been born into. In just a few hours, the careful plan I'd constructed would unfold on Cornell's graduation stage. My parents had taught me one valuable lesson through their neglect: self-reliance. That lesson was about to come full circle in the most public way possible. Graduation morning dawned clear and bright. The Cornell campus transformed into a postcard-perfect image of academic achievement. White tents dotted the arts quad, their peaks visible from my dorm room window as I made my final preparations. Today marked not just the completion of my degree, but the culmination of my carefully orchestrated plan. I dressed methodically, first the new navy dress, then the honors cords representing summa cum laude status. Finally, the traditional red graduation gown and cap. Each element felt like armor being assembled for battle. The woman who would walk across that stage today was not the same girl who had arrived 4 years earlier, desperate for family approval that never came. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Running late. Traffic. Save our seats." I smiled tightly at the message, so predictably inconsiderate. I replied with the row number and section they'd been assigned, adding, "The university is very strict about seating. Please hurry." The urgency wasn't manufactured. My parents needed to be present for the scholarship announcement to have its full impact. The development office had arranged special reserved seating for the Mitchell family in the front section, where donors and university dignitaries were placed. If they missed that, my moment would lose its perfect symmetry. I joined the sea of red-robed graduates assembling for the processional, finding my place near the front with the other engineering summa cum laude recipients. Professor Hayes spotted me and made her way over, resplendent in her own academic regalia. "Today's your day, Elaine," she said, straightening my honors cords. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," I replied, surprised at how true it felt. "Whatever happens next, I'm ready for it." She squeezed my hand, understanding the multiple meanings behind my words. "Your parents arrived," she confirmed. The development office escorted them to their seats. They seemed quite confused by the special treatment. I could imagine their expressions, my father's bewilderment, my mother's immediate assumption that there must be some mistake, Kimberly's annoyance at not being the center of attention. Good. Let them wonder. The processional music began, and we marched into the amphitheater in perfect formation. I spotted my family immediately in the front section, looking uncomfortably out of place among university trustees and major donors. My mother was craning her neck, scanning the program as if seeking an explanation for their placement. Kimberly, beside her, was picking at her nail polish. already bored with the ceremony. President Warrington's opening address flowed over me in a pleasant blur as I focused on remaining present in this moment I'd worked so hard to reach. The conferring of degrees began, organized by college within the university. As the College of Engineering graduates were called, I straightened my shoulders and prepared for my walk across the stage. Elaine Mitchell, the dean, announced, "Summa cum laude, with departmental distinction in biomedical engineering." As I crossed to receive my diploma, a glance toward my family showed their reactions. My father politely clapping, my mother offering a tight smile, Kimberly scrolling through her phone. None of them truly understood what I'd accomplished or what it had cost me. But that was about to change. After the degrees were conferred, President Warrington returned to the podium for the special recognitions portion of the ceremony. This was typically when exceptional academic achievements, teaching awards, and major donations were acknowledged. Before we conclude today's ceremony, President Warrington began. We have several special announcements regarding the future of Cornell University. First, I am pleased to recognize this year's recipients of the Presidential Fellowship for Advanced Research. My name was called among 5 others, each of us standing to acknowledge the prestigious postgraduate research opportunity we'd been granted. I saw my mother lean over to whisper something to my father, likely wondering if this was the special recognition I'd hinted at. Little did they know, this was merely the appetizer. The ceremony continued with faculty recognitions and various awards, each building anticipation for the final and most significant announcements, the major donations that would shape Cornell's future. Cornell University is fortunate to have the support of generous benefactors who ensure our continued excellence. President Warrington continued, "Today, we are honored to announce several transformative gifts to the university." He proceeded through the list, acknowledging donations of increasing size of $50,000 laboratory upgrade, a $100,000 library endowment, and a $500,000 faculty chair. With each announcement, I could see my family growing more restless, wondering why they were seated in this donor section when they'd contributed nothing. Finally, President Warrington paused, building dramatic tension for the final announcement. "It is now my great privilege to announce the largest gift in this year's commencement. A 7-figure donation establishing the Mitchell Family Scholarship for self-supporting students. This extraordinary endowment will provide full tuition and stipends for engineering students who, like the scholarship's founder, must support themselves through college due to family financial abandonment." A murmur swept through the crowd as President Warrington continued. "Would Robert and Margaret Mitchell please stand and be recognized for their family's transformative generosity?" The spotlight found my parents, illuminating their stunned expressions as they hesitantly rose to their feet. My mother's face had drained of all color, while my father looked as though he might be ill. Beside them, Kimberly's jaw had quite literally dropped open, her phone forgotten in her lap. The Mitchell Family Scholarship represents one of the most significant student-established endowments in Cornell's history. President Warrington continued, oblivious to their confusion. It particularly honors those students who, through no fault of their own, must finance their education independently while watching siblings receive full family support. The specificity of that last phrase, directly echoing my own experience, caused my mother to sway slightly where she stood. University officials quickly surrounded my family, photographers capturing what they believed to be a proud donor moment. From my seat among the graduates, I watched as the public recognition they'd denied me for years was suddenly thrust upon them in the most ironic way possible. Development Director Wilson approached with a large ceremonial check, positioning himself between my shell-shocked parents for a photo opportunity. The check, made out from the Mitchell Family Foundation, displayed the exact amount my parents had claimed they couldn't afford to contribute toward my education. As the ceremony concluded and the recessional began, I remained seated for a moment, watching my family being ushered toward the VIP reception area. The confusion on their faces had transformed to barely contained panic as they realized they were expected to play the role of generous benefactors at an event celebrating their philanthropy. Professor Hayes appeared at my side, offering her hand to help me stand. "Well," she said quietly, "I believe that qualifies as a moment they'll never forget." "No," I agreed, smoothing my graduation gown. "I don't believe they will." As we processed out of the amphitheater, I felt strangely light, as if a weight I'd carried my entire life had finally been set down. The truth was out, not whispered in private therapy sessions or confessed to trusted friends, but announced from a stage to hundreds of witnesses. My family's facade of equal treatment had been publicly shattered, replaced by the reality I'd lived but they'd never acknowledged. The most difficult part still lay ahead, the direct confrontation that would inevitably follow. But for this moment, walking among my fellow graduates with my head held high, I allowed myself to simply feel the satisfaction of finally being seen. The ceremony's conclusion thrust us all into organized chaos, thousands of graduates searching for family members amidst a sea of identical red gowns, parents clutching bouquets and cameras, our university staff directing traffic flows between various receptions. Unlike my classmates, however, I knew exactly where to find my family. The exclusive VIP donor reception in the President's Garden. I deliberately took my time, allowing the initial shock to settle over my parents before I made my appearance. As I approached the elegantly tented garden area, I could see them through the entrance, my father awkwardly holding a champagne flute, my mother engaged in what appeared to be a strained conversation with Development Director Wilson, and Kimberly standing slightly apart, her expression thunderous. "Ah, here she is now," Director Wilson exclaimed as I entered, immediately pulling me into their circle. "The woman of the hour. Miss Mitchell, we were just discussing the remarkable impact your family's scholarship will have on future generations of Cornellians." My mother's face was a study in controlled panic. "Yes, we're overwhelmed," she managed, her eyes silently pleading with me for explanation. "The Mitchell family has always believed in supporting education," I replied smoothly, taking a champagne flute from a passing server, "though our methods of support have been uniquely distributed." Director Wilson, oblivious to the undercurrents, beamed. "And such a specific focus. Supporting students whose families won't or can't finance their education, it's clearly a cause close to your hearts." "Extremely close," I agreed, meeting my mother's gaze directly. Some might say intimately familiar. Before my parents could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of President Warrington, accompanied by several university trustees eager to meet the generous Mitchell family. What followed was 30 minutes of excruciating social theater, my parents, trapped in conversations about philanthropic priorities they'd never considered, forced to accept congratulations for extraordinary generosity they'd never shown, while photographers documented every uncomfortable moment. I circulated through the reception, introducing myself to university officials and answering questions about the scholarship's parameters with detailed knowledge that further confirmed my role as its architect. From across the tent, I could see Kimberly cornered by an enthusiastic alumni relations officer, her expression growing increasingly mutinous. The moment I'd been waiting for arrived when a university photographer requested a formal family portrait for the donor wall. As we were positioned in front of a Cornell backdrop, my father's tie straightened, my mother's fixed smile barely concealing her confusion, Kimberly sulking at the edge. I knew their patience had reached its breaking point. "Perhaps we could have a moment alone with our daughter before more photos?" my father managed, his voice strained but polite. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. The wisteria alcove just through those doors offers complete privacy. Take all the time you need, this is your family's special day." The moment the garden room's door closed behind us, my mother's composure shattered. "What have you done?" she hissed, her carefully applied makeup creasing with fury. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "Humiliating?" I repeated, maintaining the calm I'd practiced for this moment. "To be publicly acknowledged for financial support of education? I thought that was something families did, willingly, even proudly." "Stop playing games, Elaine," my father interjected, his face flushed. "There's obviously been a massive misunderstanding. We need to speak to someone immediately and clarify that we haven't made any donation." "That would be rather difficult," I replied, setting down my champagne flute. "Considering the Mitchell Family Foundation has already transferred the funds, signed all the necessary paperwork, and established the scholarship parameters. The first recipients will be selected this fall." My parents stared at me in stunned silence while Kimberly finally exploded. "What the hell, Elaine? Whose money are you throwing around? Because it certainly isn't Mom and Dad's." "You're right about that. I agreed. It's mine. Earned through my research, secured through my patent, funded by my innovation. The same way I earned my tuition, my housing, my books, and every other expense while you were enjoying the parental support I was repeatedly told wasn't available for me. That was different, my mother began automatically. Kimberly needed, don't. I cut her off. My voice quiet but firm. Don't say she needed it more. Don't tell me I was more capable of managing on my own. Don't repeat the lies you've been telling yourselves for years to justify your blatant favoritism. My father ran a hand through his thinning hair. How? How much did you donate in our name? The tremor in his voice almost made me pity him. Almost. $2 million? I stated flatly, watching their eyes widen. Initially, the foundation will receive ongoing royalties from my biomedical patents, likely totaling several more million over the next decade, all dedicated to helping students whose families have abandoned them financially while supporting their siblings. This is insane, Kimberly spluttered. You can't just. This has to be illegal or something. It's completely legal. The Mitchell Family Foundation is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with a clearly defined mission and legally binding contracts with Cornell University. My name is on those contracts as the foundation's president and primary donor. Your names are included as my family of origin technically accurate. If somewhat ironic given the circumstances, my mother sank into a nearby chair, her social mask completely fallen away. Why would you do this? To humiliate us? For revenge? For justice? I corrected her. And yes, partly for the accountability you've always avoided. You made a choice repeatedly, deliberately, over decades to invest everything in Kimberly while expecting me to somehow thrive without support. You denied that choice whenever I questioned it. You gaslit me, dismissed my feelings, and reinforced at every opportunity that her needs mattered while mine didn't. I walked to the window, looking out at the celebration continuing in the garden. Now that choice is permanently memorialized. The Mitchell family will forever be associated with supporting students whose families won't support them. There's a certain poetry to it, don't you think? My father approached cautiously, his voice lowered. Elaine, you've made your point, but this has to stop. We need to speak to someone about correcting this misunderstanding. I turned back to face him. There's nothing to correct. The contracts are signed. The money is transferred. The scholarship exists. Your names are attached to it permanently, just as mine is attached to the suffering your choices caused me. You vindictive bitch, Kimberly spat, finally finding her voice again. You've always been jealous of me. This is just your way of trying to make yourself important. I regarded my sister calmly. I don't need to try, Kimberly. I am important. My work will save lives. My research will advance medical treatment. And yes, my money will now help students who, like me, had to fight twice as hard because their families failed them. We did not fail you, my mother cried, tears now streaking her makeup. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. The bare minimum, I interrupted. You provided the bare minimum physically while withholding emotional support, recognition, and basic fairness. That is failure, Mother. And now everyone knows it. A knock at the door interrupted our confrontation. Director Wilson peeked in, smiling obliviously. The president is about to give his toast to the major donors. The Mitchells are being specially recognized. We need you all in the garden. We'll be right there, I assured him, turning back to my family once the door closed. You have two choices now. You can join me outside, accept the recognition gracefully, and perhaps begin to understand what genuine support looks like. Or you can create a scene that will only raise more questions about why you're so uncomfortable being praised for educational philanthropy. My father's shoulders slumped in defeat, while my mother dabbed frantically at her mascara. Only Kimberly remained defiant, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. This isn't over, she warned as we moved toward the door. You're right, I agreed, opening it for them. The scholarship will continue for generations. The Mitchell legacy of supporting self-funding students is just beginning. As we rejoined the reception, I watched my parents mechanically playing their assigned roles, raising glasses for the toast, accepting congratulations, smiling for photos that would soon hang in the university's donor hall. The foundation I'd created would force them to confront their favoritism every time they visited campus, every time they read an alumni newsletter, every time someone congratulated them for their generosity. It wasn't just revenge. It was accountability cast in bronze, printed in programs, established in perpetuity. And watching them navigate the reception, my father's forced smile, my mother's brittle laughter, Kimberly's sullen silence, I realized that truth, once revealed, could never be hidden again. No matter what happened next between us, the reality of our family dynamics was now a matter of public record, enshrined in a scholarship that would help others even as it documented my parents' failure. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free of the need for their approval or recognition. I had created my own legacy, one that transformed personal pain into opportunity for others. As I accepted congratulations from professors and university officials, I could feel my parents watching from across the room, finally seeing me clearly. Perhaps for the very first time, the donor reception lasted another hour, though it felt like an eternity. My parents maintained their facade of philanthropic pride through gritted teeth, while I circulated confidently among Cornell's elite, discussing the scholarship parameters I'd so carefully designed. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being invisible in my own family, I was now the Mitchell everyone wanted to speak with. As the event wound down and guests began dispersing, Professor Hayes approached me. "Your parents and sister are waiting by the east exit," she murmured. "They don't look happy." "They wouldn't be," I replied, straightening my shoulders. "But this conversation is long overdue." Diana squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens, remember you've built something important today. No matter what they say, that can't be undone." I nodded gratefully and made my way toward the east exit. My family stood in tense silence, my father checking his watch repeatedly, my mother clutching her purse like a shield, Kimberly glowering at passing students. "Our hotel room," my father said tightly when he spotted me. Now, the drive to their hotel was silent and suffocating. Once inside their standard double room, notably not the suite they would have booked for Kimberly's hypothetical graduation, the restraint they'd shown in public evaporated. "How dare you?" my mother began, her voice quivering with rage. "Using our name for this? This publicity stunt? Making decisions for our family without our knowledge or consent? That's rich coming from you," I replied, remaining standing while they took seats around the room. "You've been making decisions about this family's resources my entire life without considering my needs or feelings. We gave you everything you needed," my father insisted. "No, you gave me the bare minimum while giving Kimberly everything she wanted. There's a difference." "This isn't about ancient history," Kimberly interrupted. "This is about you humiliating our parents in front of the entire university." "Ancient history?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean like your failed 5th year of college that they remortgaged their house to finance just last year? The house they'll be paying off well into retirement because of your repeated educational false starts?" My father paled. "How did you know about the mortgage?" "I found the paperwork during my last visit home. The same visit where Mom explained yet again that they simply couldn't afford to help me, had never been able to afford it." I turned to face my mother directly. "Do you know what that felt like? To discover you had leveraged your home, your financial security, to give her a 5th chance while I worked 30 hours a week for 4 years straight to avoid dropping out? To learn that we just don't have the money actually meant we're choosing not to spend it on you?" My mother's lips thinned. "Your situation was different. You had scholarships." "Partial scholarships," I corrected, "which covered less than half my expenses. The rest came from student loans I'll be repaying for years, and jobs that left me so exhausted I sometimes fell asleep in the library between classes." I paced the small hotel room, years of bottled emotions finally finding their outlet. "Do you know what it's like to watch your sister get a fully funded apartment near NYU while you share a cramped dorm room with 3 other scholarship students to save money? To hear about family vacations you weren't invited to because you were working through breaks to make tuition payments? To graduate at the top of your class and have your achievements dismissed as, 'That's nice, honey,' while her repeated failures are treated as opportunities for growth?" "Don't exaggerate," my father said weakly. "We've always been proud of you." "Empty words," I replied. "Pride is demonstrated through actions. not platitudes offered as afterthoughts. You showed me exactly how much you valued my achievements every time you missed an award ceremony, forgot to ask about my grades, or dismissed my accomplishments while celebrating Kimberly's mediocrity. So this whole charade today was, what? Revenge? My mother demanded. This charade is a $2 million scholarship fund that will help dozens of students who find themselves in my position, academically capable but financially abandoned by families who could help but choose not to. It's justice. Not just for me, but for every student who will benefit from it. Kimberly snorted derisively. $2 million? Sure. Where would you get that kind of money? I turned to her, almost pitying her inability to conceive of my success. My biomedical research. The patent I developed as an undergraduate has been acquired by Boston Bioscience. The initial payment alone was 7 figures, with ongoing royalties expected to generate several million more over the next decade. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged glances that contained equal parts shock and dawning horror as they realized the magnitude of what they'd dismissed. That's wonderful, Elaine. My father finally managed. We had no idea your work was so valuable. Of course you didn't, I replied quietly. You never asked. My mother's expression shifted, calculation replacing shock as she processed the implications. Well, this changes everything. We always knew you would be successful, darling. And now as a family, we can— Stop, I interrupted, holding up my hand. This isn't a reconciliation moment where you suddenly discover I'm worth investing in now that I'm financially successful. My money is exactly that, mine. Earned through my work, my sacrifice, my determination despite your neglect. I crossed to the window, looking out at the Cornell campus spread below us. The foundation is established. The scholarship exists. Your names are attached to it permanently, a fitting legacy for parents who refuse to support one child while indulging another. You can't do this to us, my mother insisted, her voice rising again. Using our name without permission. Actually, I can and did. The Mitchell Family Foundation is legally registered, with me as president and primary donor. The contracts with Cornell are ironclad. And the scholarship parameters specifically designed to support students whose families won't or can't support them while financing their siblings' education are now a matter of public record. My father looked physically ill. Elaine, please. We can talk about this. Find some compromise. Where was this willingness to compromise when I was struggling to pay tuition? When I was working multiple jobs while maintaining a 4 gigapascals? When I was eating ramen for weeks because I couldn't afford proper groceries? I shook my head. This isn't about negotiation. It's about consequences finally catching up to choices you made repeatedly over decades. Kimberly, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly stood. This is so like you. Elaine turning everything into a competition. So Mom and Dad helped me more financially. They loved you in other ways. The statement was so absurd I almost laughed. Name one. What? Name one concrete way they showed me equal love or support. One instance where my needs or achievements were prioritized over yours. Her mouth opened, then closed without response. Exactly, I said softly. You can't, because it never happened. And that reality, that painful, persistent imbalance is now commemorated in a scholarship that will outlast all of us. My mother tried a different approach, her voice softening into the cajoling tone she'd always used when trying to extract compliance. Darling, we understand you're upset. We may have made mistakes. But surely there's a way to— revise the scholarship name? Perhaps something more general? The paperwork is finalized, I stated firmly. The Mitchell Family Scholarship for Self-Supporting Students exists exactly as intended. Future Cornell students will know that this family, our family, recognized the struggles of those who must fund their own education while watching siblings receive full support. The room fell silent as the immutability of the situation finally registered. My father sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped in defeat. My mother's calculating expression hardened into resentment. Only Kimberly seemed unable to process the finality of what had occurred. This is insane, she insisted. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're using some temporary financial advantage to punish everyone. When your biotech thing inevitably fails, Boston Bioscience is a Fortune 500 company, I interrupted calmly. My innovation is already in clinical trials. The technology will likely become standard in cancer treatments worldwide within 5 years. This isn't a temporary advantage, Kimberly. This is my career, my achievement, my future. I gathered my graduation cap and gown, which I'd carried to their hotel. I'm leaving for Boston tomorrow. My position at the research division starts next month. This conversation has clarified exactly where we stand. So that's it? My father asked, his voice hollow. You humiliate us publicly, establish this permanent reminder of our failings, and walk away? I didn't create your failings, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. I just ensured they'd be remembered alongside the success you chose not to support. The scholarship will help others like me, that's what matters now. As I reached for the door, my mother made one last attempt. Elaine, please. We're still your family. I paused, the words triggering a complex wave of emotions I'd spent years in therapy processing. Biology made us relatives, I said finally. But your choices prevented us from ever truly being family. The people who supported me, believed in me, and celebrated my achievements, my professors, my friends, my mentors, they became the family you chose not to be. With those words, I left the hotel room, closing the door on 28 years of unmet expectations and unacknowledged pain. Whatever relationship might exist between us in the future would be entirely on new terms, my terms. The playing field had been permanently leveled, the truth irrevocably exposed. As I walked across campus toward my dorm for the final time, my phone buzzed with a text from Professor Hayes. Dinner at 7 with the research team to celebrate. Your real family is waiting. For the first time in my life, I felt completely unburdened by the weight of seeking approval I'd never receive. The Mitchell Family Scholarship would help others like me find their way without family support. That was a legacy worth creating, regardless of the personal relationships destroyed in its founding. Sometimes justice requires difficult choices. Today, I'd chosen truth over comfortable lies, accountability over continued denial. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, just as I'd faced everything else in my life. 6 months after graduation, autumn in Boston painted the city in spectacular reds and golds. My apartment in Cambridge, a modern one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Charles River, had finally started feeling like home. Boxes were unpacked, furniture arranged, and my first real paycheck had allowed me to indulge in decent kitchenware rather than the mismatched hand-me-downs of college life. My position at Boston Bioscience had exceeded expectations. The research division director had taken an immediate interest in my work, assigning me to lead a specialized team focused on expanding applications for my drug delivery system. At 28, I was the youngest team leader in the company's history, a fact that occasionally raised eyebrows in meetings but was quickly forgotten when my technical expertise became evident. Life had fallen into a rhythm I'd never experienced before, one without financial anxiety or the constant need to prove my worth. For the first time, I could focus entirely on my research without juggling multiple jobs or worrying about next semester's tuition. The stability was almost disorienting after years of precarious self-sufficiency. My relationship with Mark, a fellow researcher I'd met during orientation, had developed from casual coffee dates to something more substantial. He understood the demanding nature of our work without being consumed by it, maintaining a balance I was still learning to cultivate. Most importantly, he'd listened to my family history without judgment, offering support without trying to fix what wasn't his to repair. My parents called again. I told him one evening as we prepared dinner in my kitchen, the chopping of vegetables providing a steady rhythm to our conversation. And? He asked, sliding diced onions into a waiting pan. The usual. Mom's still trying to rewrite history, claiming they always believed in me but just showed it differently. Dad's more direct. He wants to know if I'll be home for Thanksgiving. Mark stirred the sautéing vegetables, giving me space to continue. It's strange, I admitted. For years, all I wanted was their recognition. Now that they're suddenly interested in my life, I'm not sure I want them in it. That's understandable, he replied. Recognition that comes only after public embarrassment and financial success isn't really recognition at all. His insight was one of the reasons we worked so well together. Mark saw situations clearly, without the emotional fog that sometimes still clouded my judgment regarding my family. My phone chimed with an email notification, the Cornell Scholarship Office's monthly update. I smiled, opening it immediately. The first Mitchell Scholars have been selected, I announced, scanning the message. 5 engineering students who are financing their own education while their families support siblings through college. Mark came to read over my shoulder, his arm comfortably around my waist. That's incredible, Elaine. Real impact already happening. The email included brief profiles of each recipient, their academic achievements, work experiences, and personal circumstances. Reading their stories was like looking into a mirror from various angles, each reflecting some aspect of my own experience. One young woman was working 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.9 gigapascals in chemical engineering. Another had been told his sister's art school tuition took precedence over his practical engineering degree. I'm going to mentor them, I decided suddenly. Not just financially through the scholarship, but personally. They should know they're not alone. Mark squeezed my shoulder supportively. They'll be lucky to have you. The scholarship had become something more meaningful than the revenge I'd initially envisioned. While the public revelation had certainly provided the accountability I'd craved, the lasting impact would be in the students whose educational journeys were now financially secured. Justice had evolved beyond my personal situation to a broader mission of supporting those facing similar struggles. My relationship with my family, meanwhile, continued its complicated evolution. In the weeks following graduation, communication had been minimal and strained text messages rather than calls, surface-level updates rather than meaningful exchanges. Gradually, however, as the shock of my revelation faded, more substantive interactions emerged. My father had been the first to reach out genuinely, calling one evening in July with uncharacteristic humility. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Elaine," he'd said, his voice hesitant, "about the choices we made, the way we treated you versus Kimberly. I can't undo those decisions, but I want you to know I recognize them now. I see what we did." It wasn't an explicit apology, but it was an acknowledgement, something I'd never received before. We'd spoken several times since, our conversations gradually becoming less awkward, though still careful. My mother had taken longer to move beyond denial and anger. Her initial calls had been full of revisionist history and subtle manipulation attempts to reframe their favoritism as something I'd misunderstood rather than something they'd actively perpetuated. Only recently had her tone shifted toward tentative acceptance that perhaps their treatment had been unequal. I spoke with a therapist. She admitted during our last call the confession clearly difficult for her. She suggested I might have some unconscious patterns to address regarding you and your sister. I'd nearly dropped the phone in shock. My mother, seeing a therapist? Acknowledging potential fault? The scholarship had catalyzed changes I hadn't anticipated. Most surprising was Kimberly's evolution. After initial fury and accusations, she'd fallen silent for nearly 3 months. When she finally called in late September, her approach was markedly different. "I've been thinking about what you said at graduation," she began without preamble, "about how Mom and Dad always supported me while making you fight for everything. I didn't want to believe it, but I've been looking back at how things were, and I can't deny the pattern." Her voice had trembled slightly. "I never thought about how unfair it was. I just took it as my due, you know? Like I deserved their support while you somehow didn't need it. That was messed up, and I was complicit in it." It wasn't a complete transformation. Kimberly was still Kimberly, with 32 years of ingrained behaviors. But she'd begun therapy of her own and, for perhaps the first time in her life, was taking responsibility rather than expecting rescue. She'd even found steady employment at a local gallery, committing to staying for at least a year before making any new career decisions. These fragile beginnings of accountability didn't erase the past, but they created possibility where before there had been only resentment. Whether these changes would lead to genuine reconciliation remained uncertain, but the foundation for something healthier had been laid. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself considering my father's invitation. After consulting with Dr. Chen during one of our monthly check-in sessions, I decided to attend with boundaries firmly in place. "I'll come for dinner," I told my father. "But I'll be staying in a hotel, not at the house. And Mark will be with me." That's fair," he'd replied, sounding relieved that I'd agreed to any terms at all. "We'll take whatever time you're willing to give us." The holiday gathering was awkward but significant, the first time we'd all been together since graduation. Conversation was stilted, old patterns occasionally resurfacing before being consciously redirected. My mother had prepared all my favorite foods, an obvious olive branch I accepted with cautious appreciation. Kimberly, uncharacteristically subdued, made consistent effort to engage with Mark and me without dominating the conversation. After dinner, I presented my parents with an envelope containing information about the first Mitchell scholars and their stories. "These are the students your name is helping," I explained as they read through the profiles. "Whatever happened between us, this is the positive outcome. These students won't have to struggle alone the way I did." My mother dabbed at her eyes, genuinely moved by the concrete impact of the scholarship. "They remind me of you," she said quietly. "So determined, so hardworking." I should have seen those qualities as strengths to nurture, not excuses to withhold support. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, too much had happened for that, but it was an honest beginning. The dynamics that had defined our family for decades had been irrevocably altered, replaced by cautious navigation of new boundaries and slowly building trust. Back in Boston the following week, I met with Andrea Chen, the first Mitchell scholar who happened to be attending MIT. Over coffee near campus, she shared her journey parents, who prioritized her brother's business degree over her engineering aspirations, multiple jobs stretching her thin, the constant battle to prove her worth. "The scholarship changed everything," she told me, eyes bright with emotion. Not just financially, but knowing someone else understood exactly what I was going through. It validated what I'd been feeling for years. As we talked, I recognized in Andrea the same determination that had carried me through my darkest moments. But unlike me, she wouldn't have to face her challenges alone. The scholarship provided financial support, but our growing mentorship community offered something equally valuable: understanding from someone who'd walked the same path. Back in my apartment that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The family dynamics that once defined my self-worth had been fundamentally altered. The scholarship that began as an act of justice or perhaps revenge had evolved into something far more meaningful than I'd initially envisioned. The truth was, my parents' favoritism had shaped me in ways both painful and powerful. The self-reliance I'd been forced to develop had ultimately driven my success. The determination born from having to prove my worth repeatedly had fueled my academic excellence. The emotional resilience built through years of dismissal had prepared me for the competitive world of biomedical research. Mark found me on the balcony, watching the lights of Cambridge shimmer across the river. "Deep thoughts?" he asked, handing me a mug of tea. "I was just thinking about how our greatest strengths sometimes grow from our deepest wounds," I replied. "Everything I've achieved stems directly from having to fight my way through circumstances my parents created. The difference is, you chose what to build from that pain," he observed. "You could have become bitter or given up. Instead, you created something that will help others for generations." He was right. The Mitchell Family Scholarship would outlast any lingering resentment, supporting students long after the personal drama that sparked its creation had faded from memory. That was the true victory, not the public revelation that had made my parents pale at graduation, but the legacy of support that would help others avoid the isolation I'd experienced. Family, I'd learned, wasn't defined solely by biology. It was built through recognition, support, and celebration of each other's achievements. While my relationship with my parents and sister continued its tentative healing, I'd created something more enduring: a chosen family of mentors, friends, colleagues, and now scholarship recipients who shared understanding and genuine support. As for my biological family, time would tell how far our reconciliation might progress. The scholarship had forced an honesty between us that had never previously existed. My parents were slowly acknowledging their favoritism rather than denying it. Kimberly was gradually accepting responsibility for her life rather than expecting rescue. And I was learning that forgiveness didn't require forgetting or pretending the past hadn't happened. It simply meant choosing not to let that past dictate my future happiness. Boston Bioscience had already approved the next phase of clinical trials for my drug delivery system. The technology that had funded the scholarship would soon begin helping cancer patients worldwide. My research team was exploring applications beyond oncology, potentially expanding its impact exponentially. From the wounded, invisible daughter fighting for recognition, I'd become a scientist whose work would save lives, a mentor supporting others through similar struggles, and the founder of a scholarship that transformed educational inequality into opportunity. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making others suffer for their mistakes, it's using those mistakes as foundation stones to build something greater than anyone thought possible. The scholarship that had made my parents pale at graduation had evolved from an act of accountability into a legacy of genuine support, turning family favoritism into a force for positive change. In the end, I discovered that true justice wasn't about evening scores, but about creating meaning from suffering. The Mitchell Family Scholarship would help others transform their pain into purpose, just as I had done. And perhaps that was the most fitting conclusion to my family's complicated story. Has anyone in your family ever treated you differently than your siblings? How did you handle that situation? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes, sharing our stories helps others feel less alone in similar situations. If this story of turning family pain into something positive resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to see more real-life family transformations. Thank you for listening to my journey, from the overlooked daughter to the architect of my own legacy. Remember, sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest strengths when we choose how to use them.